America has always prided itself on being the land of opportunity. That image, for many people, is fading. Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton and his wife, fellow Princeton professor Ann Case, say that for the majority, the reality of the American dream is disappearing.
I do worry about a world in which the rich get to write the rules, which the rest of us then have to obey.
In this episode of Moving Upstream, I head to Princeton to find out what has led these provocative thinkers to ring the alarm bells.
This 250-year experiment we've had with democracy could be coming to an end.
Might be on the edge of a precipice.
Professors Deaton and Case are on a mission to solve a mystery. What's behind the decades-long rise in suicide rates in America? And what does it say about our country?
In every state, in prime age, whites' deaths from suicide went up between 1999 and 2016. But we think it's a real sign that something is not right.
The professors note that the suicide rate among middle-aged African Americans isn't on the rise, and it's far lower than that of whites.
Even though whites are wealthier, within an African American community, you feel you are part of a community.
Suicides are striking especially hard in a most unlikely area, one where the myth of America was made.
There's a suicide belt in America right up the Rocky Mountains.
Arizona, New Mexico, all the way up through Montana,
Alaska.
And then if you actually went further into Alaska.
Is that really a thing, a suicide belt?
That's what they call it. Do a colored map of the U.S. showing where suicide rate is higher. It looks like the Rocky Mountains.
Are we talking about despair caused by economic hardship, or is it something in the spirit of America?
I think economics may trigger some of these things, but in the end, it's a failure of spiritual and social life that drives people to suicide.
Is it reasonable to think that if some of these people had more money, that they wouldn't fall into the pits of despair?
I don't think anyone doubts that if they had more money, they'd be better off, right? I mean, for economists have trouble.
But you can't link these deaths to having more money or less money. It just doesn't work.
If you take a look at the data from the Great Recession, you see what they mean. Even though the economy tanked and many Americans lost their savings, it didn't significantly move the suicide trend line.
You used the term deaths of despair. Did you guys coin that?
Yeah.
The addiction thing is so close to suicide. Some of the opioid doctors talk about a lost generation.
One of the things that intrigues the researchers is that it seems to be a North American phenomenon.
This is where the comparison with Europe is very important, because you don't really see deaths of despair.
Though in Southern Europe, you do see really high unemployment, particularly for young people.
We're not talking about unemployment here. It's much more to do with these, things that you would correlate with the spiritual crisis.
The Europeans are not killing themselves the way that the Americans are. They've lost jobs. Technological changes come to Europe. So one of the places our research will go next is, what are the big differences between the Europeans and the Americans that it's helping the Europeans keep body and soul together?
Deaton and Case offers some theories. One, the breakdown of families.
The things that make people want to kill themselves or lose the meaning of life are to do with things like your marriage has never worked out. You don't know your kids anymore.
Social bonds deteriorating, is that what we're talking about?
Another theory, Americans making a religious migration to churches that Case thinks are changing the way faith connects in the community.
And you've said something really provocative on this. You've singled out the evangelical church.
That is a church that more people are identifying with, and it's a church which encourages my personal relationship with my Savior, but it's a very individual experience. Whereas the mainline Protestant churches or the Catholic Church would be you're part of a community.
We've nothing against the evangelical churches, and we're certainly not correlating the evangelicals with the death, so we don't have the data for that.
But one of the things you might think if a community is coming apart is you see less religious observance, and you do not.
But there is one correlation they find in the numbers.
All this bad stuff, by and large, is happening to people who do not have a BA. And people who do have a BA are largely exempt from this. The economy is no longer offering a good life to people without a university degree.
People in the US that only have a high school diploma are more than twice as likely to kill themselves as those who hold a college degree. Today, fewer than a third of Americans ultimately earn a bachelor's degree before reaching the age of 29.
If we can only generate good lives for an elite that's about a third of the population, then we have a real problem.
The real problem, as Deaton and Kay see it, is that deaths of despair are an indicator.
So, I mean, I would go as far as to say if we can't fix this, it really is a crisis of capitalism. You know, it doesn't seem to be working for people who are not very well educated.
Up until the Second World War, the dominant intellectual views then was that capitalism was sort of broken.
Little man, what now?
There were a lot of people who were flirting with communism or socialism in one form or another. And what seemed to happen after the Second World War is that it started delivering for more or less everybody. And so you got this long period from 1945 through to the early 70s when all boats rose together. Working class people, people without a college degree who entered the labor market around 1970 had a great world. That was a world in which you could belong to a union. There was a fabric of working class life which looked like it was going to go on forever. And that world has been sort of coming apart since 1970. You know, median wages in real terms have been pretty stagnant for 50 years.
The professors think conditions are ripe in America for one of two things to happen. One, a resurgent left declaring war on laissez-faire economics.
Capitalism in America is much more anti-worker than it is in Europe. I mean, the income tax rates are not very different from what they are here. But in Europe, there's a value-added tax that generates a huge amount of revenue, which is used to maintain an elaborate social safety net. We don't have that here.
We've produced the Bill Gateses, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Steve Jobses. They've come from America, not from Europe. Some of the greatest minds on this planet have emerged from this society.
Well, a lot of them are immigrants. So, you know, something like half of the Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants. The year I got the Nobel Prize, there were 4 Americans. 3 of us were immigrants. Do we have a free society? We don't look after each other. And in the end, it's rough and tumble. A lot of people fall through the cracks. But on average, we do well, right? But the question is on average we do well okay if it's only the top third? If it's only the people with BAs? You know, in the end, you'd want a world where people don't have to go to college, right?
The other possibility, with inequality reaching such a high level, they say it may be the fabric of our society that could be the next casualty.
You know, when you see a society's life expectancy beginning to tip over for like 3 years in a row, which it has been for whites and 2 years for the whole population, the only time that's happened before was, you know, because of smoking. So this is, you know, that does suggest that something really bad is going on under the surface.
Canary in a coal mine kind of situation?
Yes, exactly. And that's very worrying. And, you know, the world is a much better place, but it's a very fragile place.
What happens if, say, the stock market fell by 50% again? You could have some constitutional crisis. You could have a lot of things like that would go together. North Korea is the most obvious thing. Put a couple of those things together and the world would not look quite such a happy place.
These acclaimed Princeton professors think the American ideal of self-reliance
is due to changes in the economy becoming outdated? Is the isolation and despair being experienced by so many people in this country, less educated whites in particular, pushing us towards some sort of crisis? What do you think? We look forward to reading your comments.